there's a really elaborate and profound pattern of alignment between dolmen structures and Neanderthal sites. It stretches all the way from the Pyrenees, all the way down the Iberian Peninsula to the Strait of Gibraltar. This is some of the highest concentration of Neanderthal sites on planet Earth. And everybody wants to understand what is the function of these structures. And yes, there's an energy involved. Like everyone can pretty much get behind that. They're harvesting or consolidating or cultivating this natural earth energy, what Tesla would call a subtle energy. Mm-hmm. And Tesla is the key. Tesla is the key to understanding what they were doing, because Tesla understood it. But where we get lost is practical application.
Yes, every time. And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the Adapt 2030 channel. You always ask me to bring bright minds on here that can help us explain the past and why we're going through some of these cycles and maybe what to expect as we move through the change that we're experiencing right now. But again, we have to understand the past before we can even get a forecast of what the possibilities could be. And that's why the history is so important. You have the reference from the past of the max possibility of it, and maybe we could go out into the future and take a look. But you see the world changing around us. So I have with me Mark Carpenter today, cultural anthropologist, writer, some say controversial, some say rogue. What would you call it if you blend physical sciences and cultural origins to try to scrape down to the bottom of where we came from, how these cycles work, did they leave us remnants? And if there are, why can't you talk about some, but you can talk about others? That's the whole thing. What kind of information fingerprint of our previous society is really out there to warn us about the future or give us a signal or a message how to navigate the future? And I think we have one of the best people on the planet right here to talk about it. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. If you do, please like, subscribe. I'll put all the links below so you can visit Mark's site, myapocalypticchronicles.com. And remember, also, he's a writer for Ancient Origins, been on Coast to Coast AM a couple times. And there's some clout behind the information. So mainstream cultural academia doesn't really want to play in that ballpark because you can prove history's far further, further back in time and a lot more things that, I don't know. There's disappeared chapters of history, and I'm just going to leave it there. Mark, thanks for joining us. I'll let you continue on that. We talked to Sliver before the show here, so floor is yours.
Well, first, I have to say thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your kind words, Ryan. It's great to see you again.
Oh, yeah, and I'm sorry. Ryan's here with me. The cohort is swinging up.
Yeah. My name is Ryan. I'm David's neighbor and head of waterfowl production.
Head of waterfowl production. That's a great title.
This is funny because I actually found your work like 10 years ago when I was studying ancient civilizations and electric universe and all this stuff. And then I met Mark recently at a expedition to the Pinson Mounds in West Tennessee. We were looking at the second largest Native American mound builder mound in North America. It's like 72 feet tall, I think. This huge megalithic structure we were able to walk on top of and see all these astronomical arrangements and everything. We'll touch base on it. But yeah, so that's how I met both of these gentlemen, and I got them in touch. And so yeah, excited to see where the thoughts go here.
Yeah, and I want to get on the next trip, so please give me the calendar in advance. I want to know where you're going to be going, because then I could do a little research and then have like just a groovy jive session, watching and looking at different things from different angles. Plasma versus, how do you look at something? That's a whole other thing. I'm sorry, Mark, to cut you off, but to frame it again, like the way that people look at information differently and come to conclusions differently, we shouldn't be penalized for that. That should be the main crux of conversation, is how do you see it differently? But now if you have a different opinion that doesn't kowtow exactly 100% to what should be known by a very sliver, I mean, I'm talking like just tenths of a percent of what should be inside the bounds. I mean, why can't we interpret information differently and talk about it? So again, sorry, back floor is yours. Ryan introduced everybody. Mark, hey. Gold has soared past $2,000 an ounce. All-time record high prices, wars in Israel and Ukraine, rate cuts on the table, fueling gold's meteoric rise. Call the proud America to the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Mention the Adapt 2030 channel. You're going to get some great in-class service. Also, Patriot Gold Group has a no fee for life IRA where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver. No fee for life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Give them a call, 888-546-7020. And now on with the video.
No, that was fine and the perfect segue, because for any who don't know anything about me and wonder who is this guy, that explains in a nutshell my life's work. I was heavy into Mayan archaeology in the Yucatan Peninsula, archaeological internship, University of North Carolina, early 2000s. And what I was obsessed with human origins. I was obsessed with the dawn of civilization. I was obsessed with the pyramid, megalith, Stonehenge, burial mound phenomena. And did I already say the disappearance of the Maya? I wanted to know. I wanted to know what happened to the Maya. I wanted to know what was up with this pyramid construction. And at the deepest level, yeah, I wanted to know about the origin of our species.
I just had a chance to have an interview with somebody who knew the author of Stone of Plenty, where they went to put the seeds on top of these Mayan temples to energize them in a different magnetic field to increase yields. Do you know anything about that? Like, I'm really very fascinated by this now. Stone of Plenty, I think, was it, where they energized the seed?
Yeah, Stone of Plenty, Seed of Knowledge, written by Burke. I've read every word of it. I've talked to his disciples. So Burke's whole thing was that these structures were designed by ancient people to generate a sort of geomagnetic fecundity and an energy, and that it was cultivating a natural energy in order to enhance biodiversity and plant yields. And he did experiments where he studied the electrical currents in these dolmen chambers, and he studied I actually learned a great deal from Burke's works. He and I disagree on some fundamental things. I think Burke was clouded by I say this with the highest regard and respect. Much love to Burke and his research. But his whole thing was he was a plant scientist before he began studying this. And I think he confirmed his own bias that the function of these structures was to enhance fecundity vis-a-vis this natural energy consolidation.
Was it true?
However, okay, so yes, that there is this life force energy being cultivated there. He's absolutely right about that. And he enlightened me to a great deal about when land masses intersect and they have their own current. And then at the intersection of these land masses, you have an intersection of currents, which creates some sort of effect that I'm not sure he fully understood, and I certainly don't either. Perhaps you fellas could shed light on these types of effects. He did make some really interesting determinations about how there was some reversal of charges in the chambers themselves that he said was not naturally occurring. It somehow the structure itself was reversing a charge, but nevertheless, what Burke thought was their function is really a side effect of their true function, which was ceremonial. But ceremony is not, for them, was not this empty practice like it may be for us today. Their ceremonies involved harnessing the very essential energies of the heavens and the earth and the underworld, and they created these temple portal shrines, these acoustic shrine stones. Ancestor stones is what many traditions call them. Ancestor shrines.
Go ahead.
So Mark, was this a tradition in North America or like, like Europe, Asia,
Worldwide.
Hmm.
Worldwide, but at different times. There were various waves as the Pleistocene ended and the continents became more habitable. The different bloodlines began to ebb and flow. Now there's various narratives with various takes on it, but we can say for certain that there were various waves over the past, let's just call it 10,000 years, which scattered this ancient relic culture all over the world. And we visited a slice of it in Tennessee.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I saw another one where, and I was thinking of when I was looking up the book Stone of Plenty, and I was just looking at, like, a couple of the pictures of the cover and stuff, and it showed kind of like these megalith stones that were sitting there. And I was reading about some the other day, which they were down in Ethiopia, and it was for it was some like early Hebrew stuff, but it was for like animal sacrifices or whatnot. And it was
Yes.
just like they had like these like like bowls kind of like carved out of like the tops of the stone. And so they
Yes.
were explaining it like it was an animal sacrifice thing. But I was also thinking, like, what if they were also like, like charging seeds or whatever stuff in there too? I don't know. Just kind of, it's weird how the different
Well,
countries around the world use different types of megaliths.
what we okay, see what our modern minds lose sight of is this relationship between the ancient people, the deities, and things like agriculture and weather phenomena. We mock it today, like, oh yeah, do a rain dance, make a sacrifice, ha ha ha. But that's exactly what they were doing. And what we don't understand is that there is a geophysical component to it, or there was. And we like lost that. Now this is wrapped up in occultism and superstition and mythology. But yes, the construction of altars was not simply about making an object, it's not simply about a surface platform whereby you do a ritual. There was a geomagnetic physical component to it. And when using sound and ritual and altered states of consciousness, and in alignment with astronomical bodies and times of year and so forth. When you combine all that together with the ritual sacrifice, that's how they were able to commune with non-human elder life forms, deities, if you will. And that was how they were able to manipulate the weather and build amazing things with no tools, and we're all baffled by it because it's this intersection of witchcraft and non-human intelligence, and now we find ourselves in a tumbling down a hole type situation.
Yeah, let me ask the question then. Would that be every
Please.
megalithic site? Because you got to think about the way they get our minds to portray this is like a bunch of people on top of one temple, and that's it. Like almost every time you reference these types of uses of energy, sacrifice, or whatever it is, or some kind of ceremonies, it's just like one temple on top of one. But I've been to Tikal as well, and El Mirador, and a few other places. There's rings of those temples around. So imagine if the same thing was going on a ring of like 12 to 15 of those, and those amplified energies were then connecting between each other and then resonating in a circle. And eventually, if they started thinking about it, then what happens? Because I was asking, like, what did they do when they harvest the energies then? Like, what was the purpose? Okay, they harvested the energy. Like, what was the purpose of it?
That's a really, really fundamentally great question. There's been ink spilled, right? Dollars have been made and videos have been produced and oceans of ink and minds have been lost, and everybody wants to understand what is the function of these structures. And yes, there's an energy involved. Like, everyone can pretty much get behind that. They're harvesting or consolidating or cultivating this natural earth energy, what Tesla would call a subtle energy. And Tesla is the key. Tesla is the key to understanding what they were doing, because Tesla understood it. But where we get lost is practical application.
Yes, every time.
So there's a rather intelligent man named Dunn who wrote a book about how the Great Pyramid was a power plant, and that it radiated out this energy, and it was transmitted by the various obelisks around the entire Egyptian, because he noted the obelisks were granite and they're acoustic. I've seen videos, and I've taught my people in Egypt have stood before a pink rose granite obelisk.
Pink rose, there it is again.
We were just talking about
pink rose before. Yeah,
right. We'll come back. Remind me. We'll come back to the balancing rock in upstate New York, which is
that's exactly what we were talking about. I was talking about dolmens, right. Plasma shelters. Yes. Those, like, you talk about bomb shelters today. Those were plasma shelters. Like, the discharge coming off of our sun was so heavy with protons and like real physical matter that was slamming the planet. And it could be probably witnessed where if you have a CME, you get about 3 days to 8 hours, depending on if it's going to travel the speed of light to get here, if it's going to, take the slow boat and kind of slowly roll in, but you'll see stuff pounding through the atmosphere. Imagine if you'd seen that, you would be starting to build dolmens and rock shelters, because that's what would protect you from actual plasma. So even if it hit the top of some of those dolmens, it would go around, it wouldn't penetrate through. Why was there I have a question for you.
Shoot.
I thought there were, in my recollection, millions and millions of these dolmens around the world. But over the last 100 years, they've been stripped and used for like building parks, buildings, highways, whatever. But like an enormous amount have been gotten rid of on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
But the function of that, is a plasma shelter.
Could be a Faraday cage or something.
Could be a Faraday cage. Yeah. I mean, that's the same thing. You're protecting yourself from the outer environment, whether it's electromagnetic or actual physical, plasma and a physical representation of energy.
Well, gosh, there's so much to unpack. Okay. So the function of these things, the energy, plasma. Okay. So speaking specifically about the dolmens, there's a lot of clues, I think, to be found in Shinto culture. And there's a huge reservoir of physical evidence, a diamond mine of physical evidence in the Pyrenees, in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, France, Portugal. This is somewhere I dream of taking a really epic tour. In my wildest fantasies, I would like to pimp a yacht on down the coast of the Iberian Peninsula, stopping periodically and going ashore to visit these places, which would just really be the most efficient way to do it. But anyway, there we have. These things are difficult to summarize. There's a really elaborate and profound pattern of alignment between dolmen structures and Neanderthal sites. It stretches all the way from the Pyrenees, all the way down the Iberian Peninsula to the Strait of Gibraltar. This is some of the highest concentration of Neanderthal sites on planet Earth. They are in, and this has never, ever been touched on by a single mainstream scholar. And I broke it down on ancient origins. Not that anyone noticed or it ever got a hiccup of traction. But this pattern is really profound because it reveals who built the structures, and it was who science calls Neanderthals, and it's who the biblical tradition calls Nephilim, and they were cannibalistic, and they did have superhuman strength. They were far more advanced than science would have you believe. They had larger cranial capacity than Homo sapiens. But what's really wild about all of that is the legends that persist, that they utilized those structures to enter into, you triggered this for me, David, that they used these structures to seek refuge into the underworld. These structures acted as the real answer to the question, what is the energy being cultivated for what purpose? To create a conduit, between underworld, surface world, and the heavens. Upon a proper alignment and the proper acoustic frequencies being generated, that's how they would access them, through sound. These are all acoustic. All of these mysterious stones, these balancing stones, these dolmens, they're acoustic. And right, so the cultivation of energy to facilitate a conduit through which they would commune with their ancestors, but they would also physically enter the conduit as well. Or upon death, they would enter into the conduit. This is where the ritual sacrifice element comes into it. When the conduit is open, the ritual sacrifice can be received, and the communion thereby transmitted. And this would then enable them to do what we have to understand too, that they weren't Homo sapien. So they inherently had capabilities that we don't. And it was all wrapped up in this, in their rituals and their communion with their ancestors. I'm sorry?
Sounds like some of that information has been passed down, because when you think of global elite in their ceremonies and in their different levels within, Freemasonry, etc., it's the ability to harness those energies that were the leftover remnants of truth on how to harness our third dimension that's been hidden from almost everybody. So I'm wondering, you sparked a thought for me there. So if I talked about so you have a direct correlation between the dolmen the dolmen areas, construction sites, etc., and the Neanderthal and habitation. I'm wondering if there's also one for the Denisovans. Like if you go back another chapter further back, is there also another equivalent of certain sites always associated with what we consider, dolmens or some kind of underground cities or superstructures to hide from the same plasma discharge from the sun on a recurring cycle?
I love that you brought up the Denisovans. I love it. The Denisovans, you mentioned when I went on to Coast. The reason I went on Coast to Coast, I'm actually not terribly fond of it, but I went on to Coast. I love that there's a platform that people can talk about these things about. I just fear that it has been infiltrated. But anyway, the point is, I went on Coast to Coast and definitively proved that giant Nephilim exist. And I did so, and I will do so again right now for anybody who doubts. In 2008, in Denisova Cave, they found a gigantic tooth. It was so enormous, they thought it must belong to a prehistoric extinct bear. Those bears, when they stand on their hind feet, are 13 feet tall and weigh like 2,000 pounds, 2,500 pounds more. The point is, when they genetically analyzed this tooth, they found that it was human. It was not Homo sapien, and it was not Neanderthal. So they had no choice but to create a new hominid species. So they called it Denisovan. And despite the fact that they have downplayed it rigorously, there is absolutely, unequivocally no escaping the reality that this hominid was a giant. This was a 12 to 13 foot tall hominid, and the volume of this tooth is even more impressive than its height. The volume is near double the over double the volume of a Homo sapien molar, which means this hominid was incredibly, monstrously huge. And apparently, according to mainstream science, it was 170,000 years old, living in Siberia in a cave. And there were other remains of Homo sapiens and Neanderthal in there as well. So it would seem that it was interbreeding with and possibly preying on the lower species of hominid and Homo sapien. Well, we know they interbred because there was traces of human Homo sapien DNA as well. So we know they interbred. That part is certain. They interbred with Homo sapiens and they interbred with Neanderthals.
Now, Mark, is that all that they've found of the Denisovans? Is one?
No, they found other remains that seem to have been more normal size, but were of the same genetic signature. But because they're downplaying this gigantic tooth so hard, they're compromised. Their credibility is compromised because they should be announcing to the world at the top of their lungs that they've vindicated thousands of years of tradition, but they refuse to do so.
Yeah, can I throw my idea why that might happen?
Oh, please.
Because those of you out there understand, we have 10,000 years of warmth every 100,000 years in this interglacial. This one's called the Holocene. There was one 100,000 years ago, 90,000 years ago. So if you're saying that Denisovans passed from 170,000 years ago to 80,000 years ago is kind of the agreed on date that they disappeared, and then there was more of a transition into the Neanderthal as a dominant species. They passed through an interglacial back then. What did they do for that 10,000 years of warmth? If we're able to go from quote unquote cavemen to steam powered things, compression and air compression powered, all the way to airplanes, rocket ships in less than 10,000 years, like 3,000 years. What did they do in that last interglacial? And if you're talking about a super species that's 12 to 13 foot tall, well, imagine the size of the brain on that. That would be like a supercomputer on feet. You know, they transited through 10,000 years of warmth. Like, what did they invent, do, or, you know, and then suddenly, and I'm wondering if it's cosmic rays, because it seems to be on a cycle where it's 80,000 years for the Denisovans, 30,000, 40,000 years, whatever the dates are for the Neanderthals to wipe out, mainly around 40 to 30. Like, if you go 100,000 years in the future, are we going to be the dominant giant species because the things that'll live through this, or the people that will be like 3 foot tall because they didn't need as many resources and they didn't need to rely. So the next, you know, there'll be 3 foot tall scientists running around going, the giants of the year 2000, you know, because it steps down in species size. If you're talking 13, Neanderthals are generally agreed to be around 8 foot tall. We're around 6 foot tall. So the next step down must, you know, they're going to look back at us as the giants. Hey, you got a giant next to me in the room here. What's going on, man? Well,
and also, I remember at least in college, they taught me that Neanderthals' brains were bigger, but it was mostly devoted towards motor skills. That's the way they explained it. So they said Neanderthals had bigger brains, but it was just because they had faster reflexes.
That would make them super scary then, and maybe that's where Bump in the Night and like scary nighttime stories. Sorry to interject there, Mark, but you talked about
No,
cultural origins. So can you
yeah,
imagine being, let's say, there's bands of humans and bands of Neanderthals or bands of Homo sapiens sapiens, like running from an apex predator. So maybe those stories of don't go out in the night, the things in the nighttime are scary. Maybe they're referencing that's the thing that will grab you and eat you. And a lot of these
that's
stories we hear
yeah,
about scary dark time is actually us and them.
absolutely. And I'm gonna do you one even better. That's you're absolutely right. We have just stumbled. So okay, so when you make this alignment between the scientific reality of these hominids. Okay, so wait, first, quick note on these hominids. Hominid, what I have coined them is invasive hominid hybrid species. And I think that's really important because one of the patterns that we find universally in the traditions and in the archaeological record. See, whenever we find the alignment, it's like the radical center of two spheres, and that's where the truth lives in that warm daylight there in the middle. And one of the universal parallels is cannibalism along with gigantic stature. And in also within the traditions is a tradition of hybridization and along with the cannibalism. So real quick, we'll run off them. So like the Olympians, they mate with the humans and they spawn guys like Hercules and Dionysus and whatnot. And then you go all the way over to China. You know, you've got Emperor Qin. A woman is visited by a dragon, and she is impregnated by it, and she gives birth to a hybrid tyrannical ruler, Emperor Qin. It still bears his name to this day. China, Emperor Qin. That's him. So on and on this goes. You know, the biblical Nephilim, the Watchers come down and they mate with women and they have the children. Well, the archaeological record does and the fossil record do reflect cannibalism, a lot of it. The Neanderthals, and not just cannibalism, but eating everything like crazy. So I just want to emphasize about the Denisova that and the Neanderthals and the various other hominids. By the way, there's a whole mess of them that most people don't know about. You know, Homo heidelbergensis and Homo floresiensis and Homo gigantopithecus, and the list goes on and on. And really quickly, I just want to touch on. People say, "Well, wait a minute, Mark. What about the ape men, the Homo erectus, and these guys?" Well, they're composites and they're frauds and they're hoaxes. That's why there's been no genetic research on them. Notice, and that's why some of them have disappeared as well. I suspect they're nothing but apes, very ancient apes. Maybe there were some ape men of some kind at some point. Anyway, I'm sort of lost my train of thought there, but I was just
double
wanted to.
species like that. Like we live with gorillas and chimpanzees
Oh,
and orangutans
yes.
today. Like, why would that be any different than what we're experiencing today? It would be the exact same.
Right, and I had right. So I just wanted to emphasize the invasive species pattern that seems to permeate the tradition as well as the archaeological record in terms of the cannibalism and the gigantic stature, because that's what we have with invasive species of fish here in Maryland, the snakehead fish. It was introduced and it has no natural predators. And you said it, Dave. You said apex predator. The word Nephilim in Hebrew is often translated as fallen ones. And that sort of adds up. But what I would suggest is in ancient terminology, to fall on someone means to prey on them. So Nephilim, to fall upon those who fall upon their enemies, means hunters. It means apex predators. So I think you really hit the nail on the head with that one. And the mind-blowing thing that I was trying to share before I went into that rant was just that they, I think, are still alive. They're not extinct. I don't think so. A lot of what we think were wiped out are still hiding in relic species.
Yeah, can I throw a strange thought on top of that?
Please.
Well, you were saying the extra brain capacity is used for agility. And I don't mean to go too woo-woo, but if you start to listen to tales of hunters describing, or people that have described seeing what was now known as a Sasquatch, that thing has some of the most incredible superhuman abilities. If you believe the stories for the people who tell them, that they've seen things move so fast that it's a blur of light going past. That the incredible speed at which its mind, it actually numbs them to watch how fast it moves. It like shocks them. You know, like maybe a tiger can have sort of a sound resonance that'll paralyze you. Well, the speed at which these things moved had paralyzed them just in like, yeah, that's not even my frame of reference on how fast something like that could move. And the size is always compared to 8 feet, 10 feet, like the alpha males at like 10, 12, is like girthy 6 feet across on the shoulders, but invisible sitting next to you. Blinding speed that could lift up trees and just like rip trees from the ground. Like, if you believe what people say that they've seen, you know, I mean, Sasquatch not proven, because you mentioned genetics. That's the reason I wanted to bring it up, because if there should be genetic evidence of these same species around. And I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, I wasn't even saying anything. But if you are like, crossbreeding something, like whether it's, like mules were breeding horses and donkeys together, or different types of chickens, or different types of dogs, or whatever. Like, if we're not the top of the food chain, and if there is something above us, whether you're getting into Nephilim or Anunnaki or ancient gods or whatever, there could be some kind of crossbreed in there, some kind of gene manipulation or whatnot. And yeah, you could definitely get a bunch of those different species explained that way. And some of them could maybe get some, extra sensorial properties if that's the case.
My research indicates that's absolutely the case. Once you strap on this lens and polish it clean, and you devote discipline and objective reasoning to it, you will start to understand that these invasive hominid hybrids and their ancient culture of whatever energetic nature worship and ancestral communion and witchcraft. Once you understand it, and you understand that they linger on the fringes of wilderness and society. And okay, we're getting a little deep here, and we understand that certain remnants of their witchcraft exist in our culture, just as you were saying, David, that you see this reflected in the secret societies of the so-called ruling elite, or just the most effective criminals on the block. Yes, that's absolutely the case. They are perpetuating this ancestral tradition. The link has not been broken. And the bloodlines do still remain. Some of them are still really hybridized, and they're really, really freaky. Yes, like the Native American Sasquatch. Mainstream media has deliberately degraded it and made it into a joke. And they did that because they knew that it could be proven. And they knew it was real. And now so as I was saying, when you clean off this lens and you really study this with this loupe, you'll see that this unlocks 1,000 mysteries across all cultures, across the world, and even modern day mysteries and tragedies, like the missing people phenomena in all these national parks. That's why they're going missing. They are being abducted by these swift-moving, supernatural, hominid hybrid predators. And that's why there are weird correlations with boulder fields and weather phenomena in relation to the disappearances and why search and rescue fails so miserably to find anything. They can't figure that out because they have FLIR. They have forward-looking infrared radar. They have scent tracking dogs. In some instances, the person goes missing, and within a half hour, they have search and rescue on the case. Search and rescue data indicates that 98% of these people are found dead or alive within like 72 hours. So the outliers are very interesting. And when they completely defy the statistical data, that indicates just by scientific method that something else is occurring than someone being attacked by an animal or injured or lost or dying of exposure. We find those bodies. Those bodies give off heat for days. They stink like god-awful hell. The dogs will find them. Even if they are wedged in some terrible crevasse, the dogs will hit on their scent. So where have they gone? They have been abducted and they have been taken into these conduits that we have discussed. They slip in and out of these boulders into little micro ecosystems and into cave systems, and you'll never see them or even know that they were there. And it's terrifying, and we're not the top of the food chain. And I submit to everyone that this species will one day, sooner rather than later, re-emerge, and it's going to be very bad news for all Homo sapiens when that happens.
Can I throw the question?
Absolutely.
So studying more on the electromagnetic effects from the sun on certain days, I'm wondering if there was an increased amount of galactic cosmic rays where these abductions occur more at solar minimums or solar maximums. Also on specific days where there might be a more powerful coronal hole stream that's equatorial band on the sun, which is going to hit us directly on our north and south pole. And also if there maybe was a coronal mass ejection where we actually had physical energies that would pelt the planet and, you know, bend our magnetic field, if there's any more of these disappearances. Because if you could harness that type of energy in the resonant chambers you're talking about, you would look for those specific days or times where you knew that there would be a tweak in the either magnetic field or the electrics, like there's a higher millivolt charge, or like the KP index is up, or you got the Schumann resonance higher, that you could also, during those times, amplify the field that you'd already created inside, like the chambers you're talking about. Now starting adding different layers of like KP index and, you know, vibrational frequency from the sun. Well, you know, like a different of an X flare and M flare or whatever, they're going to have a different frequency because they're traveling faster and harnessing this. So I'm wondering, you know, that what you talk about, those disappearances, they're creating their rift in time space, and they're jumping into like different saturations or different densities of time, where maybe we're moving 1,000 times faster than they are, because that field that opened up put them into a density or like a substrate or a saturation of time that's moving 1,000 times slower than us. And you always hear those stories, they'll go by 50 times and then, like, you know, weeks and weeks later, boom, they pop out and they're found right there.
Yeah,
so I'm wondering, you know, they get stuck in different densities at times when these, like, when there's these rifts in. And I'm not being woo-woo, but
no.
Okay, I'm gonna go out. I was talking. Yeah, okay, you got my idea.
There's weird time. The relationship to time and the sun is essential.
Oh, you're good.
No, it's essential. I think a lot of what the cultural anthropologists mistake for solar worship, the deity dwells in their culture, dwells within the heavenly body, including the sun. And like you'll have scholars tell you that Stonehenge is an astronomical observatory. It's a solar observatory. No, it's not. Just because you observe the sun from it and it's aligned to the solar pattern, its primary function was a ritualistic center.
Pretty expensive for a calendar.
Yeah, the alignment of yes, it does. It is totally. It does function as well as a solar calendar, but that's because it needs to be aligned with the sun in order to facilitate its function. And actually, I'm going to really blow people's minds. The ritual that went down at Stonehenge was actually at nighttime, not during the day. It is aligned to the sun, but it's like you said. Okay, so David, to answer your question, yes, their whole religion revolved around these solar and lunar patterns. They understood these winds and these energies in entirely different and religious ways. They regarded these as, this is all and when you were talking earlier about these plasma currents, these ionic winds, it immediately sparked in my mind Aboriginal tradition. The Aborigines talk a lot about the rainbow serpent and how it plunged itself into the surface of the earth and ripped through these valleys and gorges, creating these river valleys. And so yeah, it's all interconnected for sure.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to piggyback a couple things on there. First off, what you asked reminded me something I heard a couple days ago, which was the Greeks had two different types of time. I'm sure people have heard that the Greeks had like different words for love and everything. They have the same thing for time. And one of them, I think it was Chronos, which is just like, the movement of like heavenly spheres and like the actual, like the way the calendar progresses and everything. And then the other one, I forget the name of it, Kairos maybe, was like actually the way that like we perceive time, like as we like change and get older as we're going through stuff. Um, so it's almost like there's a couple different ways time could be manipulated there. And then also
Wow.
as far as doing like rituals um during certain times in the solar cycle. I wonder, like, I do some like the ham radio stuff, and there's, different like different parts of the solar cycle where different like types of transmissions travel better. And I wonder if on the occult supernatural side of things, there's some aspect of that too, where like they're doing more like sacrifices on the mounds during a solar maximum or a solar
Yes.
minimum, or like, I
Yes.
wonder if that
Yes.
has some aspect
Yes.
to it.
Definitely.
Or
Definitely.
equinoxes, if
Definitely.
you're trying to get a balance, maybe an equinox is there versus, energies they're malleable.
Ryan, I didn't want to say it at the retreat because I didn't want everybody to think I was planting suggestion in their mind. Okay, but two things. One, I did not plan for us to be there during an eclipse.
Yeah, that
And
was trippy, huh?
that was wild. And the crux of my research revolves around the ring of fire. And for that eclipse to be a ring of fire eclipse, I thought was really serendipitous, and it was really inspiring to me. And I thought to myself, there really might be an energetic effect present at the mounds with this partial eclipse. I did stop everybody there. We were approaching it, and I just stopped everybody for like no reason. And I was just like, anybody? I was like, I'm not trying to suggest anything, but anybody, anything, and everybody just sort of looked around like clueless. So I was like, okay, never mind, let's go.
And well, I'll definitely say it was certainly awe-inspiring. As we were walking up to it, it was just like this flat pathway going up to this big monstrous mound. Is I've done a bunch of exploration around like the US. I've seen stuff down in like the Southwest, Mesa Verde, that sort of stuff. But that kind of stuff is all like tucked into the caverns and it's tucked into the cliffs and everything. This was just totally flat. And then there's just like this huge like earthen pyramid just sticking up like 75 feet or whatever.
It's massive.
Yeah, I think I was talking to the park rangers all about it. I think they said it was 36 million basketfuls of dirt and clay. This thing was
12 people built that in their
ginormous.
off time after they were done farming for the day.
And the
It
archaeology
totally took up the skyline. It was like you go to the top and you just see for miles and miles all the rest of the mountain complex, and
oh,
especially
and
seeing like an
yeah,
eclipse in the sun right above it. It was pretty awe-inspiring. I'll just say that.
even the mainstreamers will tell you that it was built according to a master plan, and that these mounds seem to have been built in one continuous building session. So how in the heck did they lay 36 million? And I'm not even the whole basket thing. If that were the case, there should be an epic number of baskets found from here to Timbuktu. We should have found 30,000. Now they find some baskets. Okay, they find some baskets. But if they're going to tell me that Native Americans schlepped all that dirt via baskets, then I want to see at least 10,000 ruggedy baskets, strewn across all these mound sites. That does not exist. They
The fable exists.
their narrative is such an absurd. These mound builder cultures. So you will hear these words: the Adinas, the Hopewell, the mound builders. All of those names were invented. There were no people called Adina. There is no tribe called Adina. The Native Americans do not recognize anyone called Adina. They invented that word for a tribe, for people that they just didn't know anything about. Hopewell is the name of, some, naturalist dude from the mid 1800s who was studying the civilization and called him Hopewell. Cool. And then mound builders is probably the most accurate one, because the only thing they know about them is that they built these mounds, and apparently some of them had some abnormal genetic features, and apparently they were worshipped by the Native Americans or subjugated at the very least.
Yeah, because Etowah Indian mounds, when you're going down to Atlanta as well, that's on that
Yes.
same genre,
Yes.
and it's a massive complex. Really, it is. You get out there and you're like, wow, that's impressive. Like, I was over in China and we went out to Xi'an and then further out to Shenyang, which was the original capital outside there. And man, those pyramids or / tombs, excuse me, go for hundreds of miles. And there's what you consider like earthen pyramids or pyramids in China. It stretched for 100 plus miles going from Xi'an out west toward Tibet, out that direction.
You have been to the Chinese pyramids?
Oh yeah, heaps. I used to live in Chengdu. I worked
man.
down in Chengdu, so we'd fly up there to Xi'an, and then we'd get a guy because we spoke Chinese, so you could get out to Shenyang and you could rent a motorbike. And you could stay at all the guest houses, and you could tell them exactly where you want to go, exactly which pyramid. We had all these maps. You could read Chinese. You could speak every little, even the tiniest village, because I spoke Chinese and at that time when I was working there, and you could go anywhere you want. You had the maps, you had the guides, you could tell them where you want and just go snap, 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 snap. Everything was unguarded then. Even the biggest ones only had a little rope around the back that said, don't go there. And I went to the, and I'll say one last thing. I went to go see the Terracotta Warriors. I really didn't want to see that. I wanted to go to the burial tomb that's on the outside. Because what I was feeling for was the ley lines, because there had to be like at least 2, 3, 4. That was a significant thing. Like they would have found the intersection of 8 ley lines to put his tomb on. So I thought if it was coming out directly center of the pyramid on the top and the tomb, so when you got on the top, you didn't feel it. But when you started walking around the periphery, and there was a big old trail going around the whole thing. I just started walking and observing, and then boom, you could feel it way off to the southwest there, like the actual ley line energy coming out. It had moved down away from the center of the pyramid over time in those last few thousand years.
Well, I can tell you from my understanding. So
yeah, man, we used to travel a lot in China, man, lots. It was so easy to do.
First of all, that blows my mind that you've been there, because for a long time it was completely forbidden, especially for Western people. So you're really privileged to have been out there, and I would kill to get out there. I want so bad. There is so much mystery. left out there. The Chinese are now in the process of concealing those pyramids.
Oh, they are
Some
now.
of them.
There used to be a little pier. There used to be a little museum right next to when you come to a complex. Maybe there are like 4 or 5 of them, larger ones. There'd be a museum right there of all the stuff that they dug out, especially these kind of mirror things with reflective bronze was like number one.
Yes.
And on the back there, all the designs was like the number one things that they kept pulling out as artifacts were those like reflective mirrors. And I was thinking the same thing you are with the baskets.
Yes.
Like, why do you have so many reflective mirrors? Not like 1, 10, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, like way more than you'd ever expect to be there. Like, were they reflecting them in on themselves and like charging something? Because when you're saying there's no baskets, I'm saying there's a plethora and an overabundance of that that just makes no sense.
Okay, well, I can make some sense of those mirrors for you. Okay, so one of the things I ran smack into in my research of the Maya was mercury. So let me tell you a little story real quick. Let me tell you a real story real quick. When I was getting shunned and burning the bridge of my archaeological internship, I had a friend, Manuel, and Manuel resented our superiors as much as I did. And he knew I was burning my bridge, and he loved my dissertation theory. And he was on my side. He was my inside man when I was burning them. Anyway, Manuel and I knew that there was a chamber had been discovered at Palenque, and they were not willing to breach the chamber. And Manuel and I were very upset about this because we were like, we're archaeologists and we're here to discover. And anyway, upon breaching it, which may or may not have been legal, what it ended up existing at the end of this very dark and scary tunnel was a pool of liquid mercury. And it would cause you to retch and vomit because there was mercury poisoning in the air. But the point is, the royal remains of Pakal and the Red Queen were covered in cinnabar ore. And cinnabar ore is mercury powder. That's where you get liquid mercury from. This unlocks a pattern of mercury that stretches all the way over to China. In the pyramids that you're talking about, these were the pyramids of dragon emperors. Just like we said, Qin, those terracotta warriors, that's Qin's tomb you were hanging around. And that tomb is said to have an entire replica of his kingdom, complete with oceans and rivers and lakes and ponds, all made of mercury. According to the writings, on the ground was a scale model of his entire empire, and all the oceans and rivers and lakes and ponds were made out of liquid mercury. And then to answer your question, on the ceiling of his tomb mausoleum were all the stars that were in the position when he died, and they were all made out of gemstones.
Did the date of the tomb actually match that what was told us about in history, or was it a different time?
Well, so the official position was always that it was a myth.
Yeah. Until
they found the terracotta warriors. Because the writings that they said were a myth said that he had individual statues of his entire army made to accompany him into the afterlife. So that was vindicated. So that would seem to vindicate the rest of the story, that his mausoleum is there full of mercury and gemstones, and that he's in a suit of jade armor.
So, Mark, if I could interrupt here. So you were talking about liquid mercury a minute ago, and I think there's something very special when it comes to liquid mercury. I know, at least from what I've read, when you're talking about stuff in like China, or if you're looking at like stuff in like ancient India with the Vimanas, or like all this stuff that the alchemists were doing in medieval Europe, there seems to like that was like a really special compound to them. And it seems like it could be tied into some of their like ancient technology, anti-gravity, whatever they were doing. You said you found some in Palenque as well. So like the Mayans were also doing this stuff in North America. Was Palenque the Mayans or the Aztecs?
Mayan, but see, what this really is evidence of is the hyperdiffusion of this invasive hominid species. So you see, they took their pyramid building, liquid mercury utilizing, demonic worship, musical death cult, and they took it with them wherever they went. And so Maya, what you start to understand is terms like Maya and Aztec are all really misnomers. Because people are like, what? The Maya disappeared. By the way, I solved that. They didn't disappear. That's what happened to the Maya. They never disappeared. They're still right there. I went and hung out with them. And they explained to me that it was the ruling elite that disappeared. And they didn't disappear. They were revolted against. Because people got tired of being fodder for cult. You know? And eventually, we'll see the cult had multiple functions, but one function was to keep the population in check. They control their food and they control their religion, and they psychologically, spiritually dominate them. And so the Maya simply revolted against their occupying oligarch rulers. They revolted against them, and they went someplace else, and they started a new cult center somewhere else, and they enslaved those indigenous people until eventually they had enough, and they revolted, and on this went. And you can track them all over the world doing this.
And now, presently, today, they are called